President Trump welcomes Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to the White House to talk investments, arm deals, and much more. But is the White House driving a hard enough geopolitical bargain, especially if President Trump intends to sell the Saudis the F-35 fighter jet?
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We're joined today by my colleagues on the editorial page, editorial board members Elliot Kaufman and Kate Odell. The White House rolled out the red carpet on Tuesday for Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia. Not a state visit because he is not technically a head of a state. That is the king and his father. However, warm welcome there in the White House, a black tie dinner on Tuesday night, and then on Wednesday, an investment business conference in Washington. Let's listen to President Trump talk a little bit about that. One of his favorite topics, deals, deals, deals.
And I want to thank you because you've agreed to invest $600 billion into the United States. And because he's my friend, he might make it $1 trillion, but I'm going to have to work on him. But it's 600. We can count on 600 billion, but that number could go up a little bit higher. Yes, or I don't know. We'll see. But we appreciate it very much. So Saudi is going to be investing at least $600 billion. And that means investments in plants, in companies, money on Wall Street. And what it really means for everybody that really counts is jobs, a lot of jobs.
And here's another section of that White House meeting. This is President Trump responding to a question from the press about Jamal Khashoggi, the journalist who was killed by Saudi agents in 2018 in a consulate in Istanbul.
As far as this gentleman is concerned, he's done a phenomenal job. You're mentioning somebody that was extremely controversial. A lot of people didn't like that gentleman that you're talking about. Whether you like him or didn't like him, things happen. But he knew nothing about it, and we can leave it at that. You don't have to embarrass our guest by asking a question like that.
Elliot, long been a complicated, complex relationship, the United States and Saudi Arabia. What do you make of this meeting here between President Trump and MBS, as he is often called?
Well, I think it's a sign of just how much the relationship has changed since that murder of Jamal Khashoggi was in the news. 2018, in 2019, Joe Biden, speaking in a Democratic primary debate, was asked about Saudi Arabia. What are you going to do with them? He said, well, we're not going to be selling them weapons. And in fact, we're going to make them a pariah, which they already are. And he said the present government of Saudi Arabia was really beyond the pale. Well, that government hasn't changed, but I think geopolitical reality couldn't be avoided. And it isn't so much that President Trump has changed the U.S. approach, but President Biden himself, by the end of his term in office, when he needed help on oil prices, when he needed help on regional diplomacy, came to realize he couldn't treat MBS and Saudi Arabia as a pariah. He had to work with them. And here we see President Trump taking that to the next level, major deals, commerce, defense, and more.
And not even major deals on investments and arms, but very sophisticated arms, including potentially the F-35 fighter jet. Let's listen to President Trump talking about this idea of selling the F-35 to the Saudis.
When you look at the F-35 and you're asking me, is it the same? I think it's going to be pretty similar, yeah.
How will that
This is a great ally, and Israel's a great ally. And I know they'd like you to get planes of reduced caliber. I don't think that makes you too happy. They've been a great ally. Israel's been a great ally. And we're looking at that exactly right now. But as far as I'm concerned, I think they are both at a level where they should get top of the line.
Kate, what do you make of the idea of selling the F-35 to the Saudis?
I think it depends on what the United States can expect in return. And I think there are kind of a couple main asks that the United States should have. One of them would be kind of pulling the Saudis out of any Chinese orbit. The second being that the Saudis would normalize its relationship with Israel, which has been a goal of U.S. policy for some time now. I mean, on the first point, I think a concern you're going to hear in the coming weeks, particularly from lawmakers who will look at this potential sale for F-35s as well, is the possibility of our, advanced stealth fighter jet technology falling into the wrong hands. The Saudis do have have done some military exercises with the Chinese military. The United States, for instance, to give another example, has not been selling F-35s to Turkey because Turkey owns a Russian air defense system. And the concern has basically been that you would be allowing a Russian air defense system to conduct target practice on NATO pilots, and that should be unacceptable. So I do think there will be some concerns about an F-35 deal about making sure that that advanced stealth jet technology doesn't fall into the wrong hands. The United Arab Emirates wanted F-35s as well, but the deal it fell apart on some of those concerns. But again, that deal was in the context of normalizing relationship with Israel. So look, I think there is a case for selling the F-35 to the Saudis. It certainly would be a tech upgrade for the Saudi military. I mean, the F-35 is significantly more capable than its current aircraft inventory, especially in environments where there are sophisticated missile defenses, and some of the threats for the Saudis, like the Houthis, have those air defenses. So it would be a significant step up for the Saudi military. I'll quickly just give you one other concern that Elliot, I'm sure, can also touch on, perhaps in much more detail than this. But there's also it's the United States policy for Israel to maintain what's called a qualitative military edge in the region. And so the Trump administration will also have to think, hey, does this selling these F-35s to the Saudis jeopardize that? And now I think, again, if this is in context of larger concessions on working with the Chinese Communist Party and normalizing relationships with Israel, I think that particular concern could be worked out. I mean, the Israelis already operate or combat experience with the F-35, probably have dozens more than I would expect we would ever sell the Saudis. They modified the jet with their own technologies to include in the jet. And so I think you could mount an argument that Israel would still maintain that military edge. But again, all of this has to be thought about in a larger picture of what the U.S. interest is and how selling F-35s is going to serve that. And so I think there are really some still unanswered questions there.
Elliot, what is your read of that question on the F-35? And do you see this as a done deal, or is this a pledge by the president to work toward an eventual goal that may hit some bumps and some hangups along the way? And then to the point about what geopolitical advances would make that kind of a deal worthwhile for the United States. I mean, Kate mentioned normalizing Saudi relations with Israel, which has long been discussed whether Saudi Arabia might at some point join the Abraham Accords. Any chatter about that today between MBS and President Trump?
Yeah, well, we heard the first time that President Trump was asked about the F-35s on Tuesday. The second time, he seemed annoyed by it already. He said, yes, we will be selling it to them. That's the end of the question. I don't think that will be the end of the question, because it will take a long time to actually get these planes out, get them to Saudi Arabia, and that leaves plenty of time for a Pentagon review process, for Congress to have itself heard. Only thing I would add to Kate's analysis on Israel's qualitative military edge is that it's not just U.S. policy, it's U.S. law to maintain that, passed by Congress. And so that won't be so easily avoided. But I very much agree that there are workarounds here. There are solutions to be found if the Trump administration wants them. Now, I would just zoom out a little. And if we ask, why we want Saudi Arabia to have F-35s, to have this stronger military. It's because the US wants to be able to do less itself in the Middle East and be able to delegate some of these responsibilities to regional allies. But if US regional allies, Saudi Arabia, Israel, can't even communicate, can't work together militarily to accomplish shared US objectives, that plan isn't going to work. And that's why linking this to normalization with Israel made a lot of sense, because it was all pursuing the same objective. When Mohammed bin Salman was asked about joining the Abraham Accords, he said something positive, but he pretty much gave the same answer that he has been giving, which is, we want to do it, but we need a clear path to a Palestinian state. And after Hamas's attack of October 7th, 2023, that has been a pretty good way for him to avoid coming to a deal. And it seems like that is still the case.
On the point about the F-35, Kate, if it makes sense maybe for the U.S. to do that in exchange for pulling Saudi Arabia out of the orbit of other players, adversaries like China, what if Trump tries to move forward on that while Saudi Arabia is still, doing drills, military exercises with the Chinese, for example? I mean, it seems to me that would make it much harder for the U.S. then to turn around and tell the Turks and UAE that they have to get rid of their Russian anti-aircraft systems, or we're going to deny them the F-35. It seems like making those boundaries and those bright lines less bright could create a real diplomatic problem in the future for the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly would increase the pressure to sell the F-35 to the Turks, and like you said, but I think Elliot is right to say that there's a long way to go here, and that before it's not as much of a done deal as Trump is perhaps presenting it as. I mean, also, I think this is a tertiary point, but I think there is a lesson for the United States here in thinking about our own defenses, because we are now we want to sell our military hardware and equipment to friends across the world. We've concentrated a lot of risk in a few specific platforms. So we're talking about, we don't want the F-35, secrets of the F-35, which is this great, it's got these advanced sensors on it. It's got advanced stealth technology. We don't want all of this going to U.S. adversaries. Well, we don't have another 5th generation fighter in production that we could sell anybody because we concentrated our bets on the F-35, and that is the 5th gen fighter flown by the entire free world. The F-22 is not in production anymore. And so I say all that because I do think there is an argument that we need to not repeat that mistake as we develop new weapons programs and not concentrate so much risk in one weapons platform, and the possibility that it could fall into the wrong hands. I think that is limiting our strategic options here in what we can sell to the Saudis.
Also, some reporting that the Saudis, as part of these conversations, this negotiating, are interested in getting access to U.S. civilian nuclear energy technology. Elliot, what's your read of the U.S. interest there, and whether that's something that makes sense? I mean, President Trump was a little more non-committal. He said he could see that happening, but also pointed out that Saudi Arabia has a lot of oil sitting under the ground.
Yes, and he said it's not urgent. And, I recall President Trump making that same observation when he was asked about Iran and what if it just wants civilian nuclear energy? And what he said was, really? It does? With all that oil, it wants to spend all this money on nuclear energy? Well, he said the same thing about Saudi Arabia. And while certainly we feel very differently about those two regimes in the United States, it is wise to be a little wary about the proliferation risk. Mohammed bin Salman has said on a few occasions that well, maybe Saudi Arabia will try to get nuclear weapons, especially if Iran is on that same path. So he's keeping that there as a contingency and building for him civilian nuclear energy with enrichment, perhaps on Saudi soil. Maybe America's handling it on Saudi soil, but if there's any Saudi involvement, that's how you gain knowledge, experience, and move yourself closer to be able to creating your own domestic capabilities. So that's a very real risk. Also, other allies in the region and outside of the region, I think, would ask the same question. Why can't we have this? In fact, why doesn't the US give it to us and help us get there? US policy for a long time has been the opposite. It's been, let's not go near there, because once a few of these countries in this most volatile region get nuclear enrichment capabilities, it could become a lot more dangerous for everyone.
Kate, the proliferation risk is also, I think, what I'm worried about. I mean, I understand why a lot of these countries, including Saudi Arabia, might be interested in pursuing a nuclear weapons program or a civilian nuclear program that might eventually lead to a nuclear weapons program, because they are in a tough neighborhood. On the other hand, especially after President Trump's and Israel's strikes on Iran and the real degradation of the Iranian nuclear program, I don't understand why now would make sense for the United States to lend Saudi Arabia a hand in this matter.
If I could just zoom us out a little bit, I think it's helpful, because I do think we are entering a new era where the risks of proliferation are significant and not ones that we've been talking about in American dialogue in probably since the Cold War. You have China undertaking this massive nuclear breakout, sprinting for 1,000 warheads by 2035. And they are not interested in arms control talks with the United States. You have the Russians experimenting with new delivery systems, new and a big advantage in so-called battlefield nukes, non-strategic nukes. So the United States has two nuclear competitors, and it also has, allies that it protects who are increasingly nervous about whether they really are protected under the U.S. nuclear umbrella. And so if you are going to introduce this proliferation risk in Saudi Arabia, like you said, there will be other United States allies. South Korea comes to mind, who will also wonder whether they need to be hedging their bets and developing their own nuclear programs. And I think creating a new brinksmanship all around the world is exceedingly dangerous, as most folks agree. But I give all that context because I think it is a bigger consideration here than maybe it seems at first blush. I'd also add too, I mean, there are other things the United States can do to mitigate some of those legitimate concerns. I mean, the U.S. just launched this devastating and successful strike on the Iranian nuclear program. And, President Trump said Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon and enforce that red line. I mean, that should really encourage the Saudis that the United States will stick to that commitment. That is a force against the Saudis needing a bomb. And so I was pleased to see that this wasn't doesn't seem to be an immediate action item coming out of this meeting. It was a punt on this particular question. And I think that's certainly for the best.
Ellie, we'll give you the last word today, but any talk between these two leaders about Gaza? And as a refresher, in October, President Trump unveiled this 20-point ceasefire peace plan. One of the prongs there is a transitional government for Gaza, an Arab stabilization force, and so forth. How has that been holding? And is that something maybe that the U.S. could use some leverage to get Saudi Arabia to participate in?
Well, it just got strengthened on paper at the UN Security Council when you had the world's powers by a vote of 13-0, with Russia and China abstaining, backing the 20 points of President Trump's plan. And so that was a major step. And you do have Arab powers, Muslim powers, even the Palestinian Authority backing this plan. On the ground, it doesn't look as good. Hamas says we never agreed to disarm and we don't agree to it now. Well, the plan kind of relies on that. And you don't have Arab powers volunteering to send their forces to disarm Hamas by force. Nobody wants that, and certainly not Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia has not been talking about contributing troops of its own to this international stabilization force. The conversation has mostly been around, will it contribute funds to help rebuild Gaza? But even that, are you going to rebuild Gaza when Hamas is running half of it? Are you only going to rebuild Israel's half of Gaza? Then does it seem like you are part of an Israeli occupation of Gaza? MBS said something positive, but very, very vague about, yeah, we're still working on it. We will do something down the road helping out there. But it looks to me like he doesn't want any entanglement in Gaza.
Thank you, Elliot and Kate. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.